Good morning and welcome to our sixth lesson in our study of the history of the Bible. Today we will continue our unit on the textual transmission of the biblical documents with a special emphasis today on the New Testament. Now, whereas the integrity of the Old Testament text is largely the result of the meticulous care of the Masoretic scribes in the transmission process, our confidence in the accuracy of the New Testament text rests more on the sheer volume of manuscript evidence available to us. Counting Greek copies alone, the text of the New Testament is preserved in some 5,856 partial or complete manuscripts, copied by hand from the 2nd through the 15th centuries. I've been teaching this course for some 20 years now, and every time I teach it again, I have to increase that number of extant known New Testament documents because they continue to be discovered and to turn up year after year. And the volume of textual evidence to the New Testament books completely overwhelms that of any other classical literature. In contrast with the New Testament, we have only 643 manuscripts of Homer's Iliad. Of the works of Plato, we have a grand total of 7 manuscripts. Julius Caesar's record of his Gallic Wars, we have 10 manuscripts. Aristotle's works, we know only through 49 manuscripts. And so, in comparison to that, we have an embarrassment of riches in textual evidence of the New Testament documents. Now, in addition to Greek manuscripts, we also have more than 18,000 manuscripts of ancient versions of the New Testament in the Armenian, Latin, Coptic, and the verdict from all of this is that the manuscript witness to the text of the New Testament exponentially outweighs that of any other literary work, both in number and in the quality of the manuscripts that exist. The oldest existing Greek manuscripts of the New Testament are written on papyrus. The papyrus writing material was made from the pith of the papyrus plant, which grew along the banks of the Nile River in Egypt. Its texture was similar to that of thick paper. It made an excellent writing surface, but it was very perishable. The oldest known piece of a Greek New Testament manuscript is called the John Rylands fragment. It consists of a 2.5 inch by 3.5 inch scrap of papyrus from a single page of a codex. And on this fragment, we have the text of the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verses 31 to 33 on one side. On the other side, we have the text of John 18, verses 37 through 38. This fragment dates from no later than the first half of the 2nd century. That's within 50 years of the original autograph. The slide you're looking at shows a translation of the front side of the John Rylands fragment. The text on the fragment is shown in the translation in red letters, while the rest of the verses are provided in black to give you some context. These verses also are translated literally, so it preserves the Greek syntax and sentence structure, and it sounds strange to our ears. But on the front side of the John Rylands fragment, if we provide the missing text, the verse begins in mid-sentence. Said to him the Jews, to us it is not possible to kill anyone, that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled that he spoke, signifying what kind of death he was about to die. Entered then again into the praetorium Pilate, and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Now, here is a translation of the backside of the fragment. Again, begins mid-sentence. That a king I am. I for this have been born, and for this I have come into the world, that I might testify to the truth. And the one being of the truth hears of me, the voice. Says to him Pilate, what is truth? And this having said, again, he went out to the Jews, and he says to them, I, not one, find in him guilt. Now, of course, the John Rylands fragment is not very helpful in studying the text of the New Testament at large, but its early date and its Egyptian provenance, which is far from the place that we assume it was written, which was in Asia Minor. These both tend to confirm a first century date for the authorship of the Gospel of John, and that has been contested at times. Some have said that the Gospel of John was written well into the 2nd century and therefore could not have been a genuine document written by the Apostle John himself. This little fragment, which is unmistakably a page from a copy of the Gospel of John, dates to very, very early in the 2nd century and confirms that the Gospel of John was known by that time and was known well enough to have been copied and distributed into places far away from where it was first written. This credit card-sized piece of papyrus is displayed today in a climate-controlled case at the John Rylands Library in Manchester, England. For textual studies, a much more helpful resource would be the Chester Beatty papyri. These date from about AD 250. This manuscript collection of 3 codices contains most of the New Testament. The papyrus manuscripts are designated in scholarly journals by the letter P and then a subscript number which shows the sequence of the papyrus manuscripts that we're talking about. Manuscript P45 contains 30 leaves from an original 220 leaf codex. 2 leaves are from the Gospel of Matthew, 2 are from the Gospel of John, 6 from the Gospel of Mark, 7 from the Gospel of Luke, and 13 from the book of Acts. So we can tell that this codex was originally a copy of the 4 Gospels and the book of Acts. The second codex in the series, P46, which is illustrated on this slide, contains 86 of an original 104 leaves of Paul's epistles. And then P47 consists of 10 leaves from an original 32 containing Revelation chapter 9, verse 10 through chapter 17 and verse 2. So we have here in the Chester Beatty papyri a 3-volume collection of most of the New Testament books. Gospels and Acts in volume 1, Paul's epistles in volume 2, and at least the book of Revelation in volume 3. And these date from about AD 250. So we're not that far removed from the useful lifetime of the autographed copies of these books, because original manuscripts could last as much as 150 to 200 years. Now, second in value only to the Beatty collection is the Bodmer papyri collection. This dates from the 2nd to the 3rd century AD. And the Bodmer collection also consists of 3 fragmentary codices. P66, which is illustrated here, and dates no later than AD 200, contains the Gospel of John, chapters 1 through 6, on 104 leaves. Plus, we have fragments of 40 other leaves containing John chapters 14 through 21. P72, dating from the 3rd century, contains the earliest known copies of Jude, 1 Peter, and 2 Peter, as well as Psalms 33 and 34. And also included in this codex are a number of apocryphal books. And then the 3rd volume, P75, contains 102 of an original 144 leaves, containing most of the Gospels of Luke and John, and dates from somewhere between AD 175 and 225. So it's late 2nd to early 3rd century AD. These are very old, very ancient codices of most of the New Testament. Because papyrus was such a perishable material, though, very few of these manuscripts remain for us to study. And those that do exist are in a very fragmented condition. But those that do exist are still very valuable as a contribution to textual studies. valuable witnesses to the early completion of the New Testament canon. The most valuable Greek New Testament manuscripts for purposes of textual studies are written on parchment. In places where papyrus was scarce or unavailable, it was discovered that the skins of various kinds of animals could be used as an alternative. Parchment was made from the hides of sheep or goats. It was an excellent material for the codex form of a book because, unlike papyrus, it could easily be prepared for writing on both sides. Papyrus was usually written only on one side and then rolled up into a scroll. When papyrus was used for codices, as the collections we showed you, it could be written on the back side, but by the nature of how it was made, it was very difficult to write on the reverse side of a sheet of papyrus. Parchment was excellent for this purpose. And also, because it was much more durable than papyrus, parchment was a popular material for important documents that were meant to last for a long time. And of course, that's exactly what our New Testament documents were. Old Testament documents written for temple or synagogue use were required to be written on high-grade parchment so that they would endure for a long time. The most valuable of all the existing New Testament manuscripts that we know about are parchment unsealed codices. Unseals are capital letters. So the description of an unsealed manuscript simply means that it's written in big capital Greek letters. These manuscripts date mostly from the early 4th century and later. Now, obviously, they're not as old as most of the surviving papyrus manuscripts, but because of the durability of the parchment, they are much more intact than the papyrus codices. Now, perhaps the oldest parchment New Testament manuscript in existence is that called Codex Vaticanus. It dates from the first half of the 4th century. Its existence was unknown until 1475, when it was cataloged into the Vatican Library, and hence its name. And even then, it remained unavailable for study by scholars until 1889 or 90, when a complete photographic facsimile was made of it. Obviously, it was not available then to the translators of the King James Version in 1611. Vaticanus contains most of the Greek Septuagint version of the Old Testament and most of the Greek New Testament. Notably missing from it are the epistles of 1 Timothy through Philemon, that is, Paul's pastoral epistles. All of the general epistles are missing, and Hebrews chapter 9, verses 14 through the end of the New Testament are also missing from this codex. Also missing are the verses at the end of the Gospel of Mark. Mark chapter 16, verses 9 to 20, which contain the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus and the record of his ascension. And also missing is John chapter 7:53 through 8:11. This is the story of the woman caught in adultery. Both of these texts are conspicuously not present in the text of Codex Vaticanus. Although there is a blank column between Mark 16:8, where the Gospel of Mark ends in that codex, and Luke 1 and verse 1. This blank column is a scribal device that was called a memorial column. It indicates that the scribe is aware of the existence of extra textual material that belongs at a particular place in a document, which is not present in the exemplar, the manuscript that the scribe is copying from. And so, not having that particular text in front of him, he leaves it blank, but he leaves an empty copy to show that something else belongs there. The ending of the Gospel of Mark is probably the biggest unsolved mystery in all of New Testament textual study. And unfortunately, we don't have the time in this study to get into it. So we will move along from there. Now, if it be conceded that Codex Vaticanus is the oldest of the parchment manuscripts, Codex Sinaiticus, which also dates from the first half of the 4th century, can boast of being the most valuable for the purposes of textual study. Its great value is attributed to its antiquity, its accuracy, and its lack of omissions. This codex was discovered in 1844 by Constantine von Tischendorf in the library of the ancient monastery of St. Catherine's on Mount Sinai, and hence the origin of its name, Codex Sinaiticus. This codex contains over half of the Septuagint version of the Old Testament and all of the New Testament except Mark 16, 9-20, and John 7, 53 through 8, 11. Precisely the same verses that are missing from Codex Vaticanus. All of the Old Testament Apocrypha, as well as the New Testament apocryphal book of the Epistle of Barnabas, and a large portion of the apocryphal Shepherd of Hermas are also included in Codex Sinaiticus. The Sinaiticus Codex actually survives in 4 pieces, and they're in 4 different locations. The principal portion, comprising 347 leaves, was purchased from the Soviet government in 1933 and is now held by the British Library in London. A further 43 leaves are held at the University Library in Leipzig, Germany. Parts of 6 leaves are still held by the National Library in Russia, the National Library of Russia in St. Petersburg. And 12 leaves and 40 fragments remain at St. Catherine's Monastery, having been recovered by the monks there from the northern wall of the monastery in June of 1975. So Codex Sinaiticus is a book that hasn't quite been able to pull itself together, but the vast majority of it, the most valuable part of it for textual studies, is on location in the British Library in London. Sinaiticus was also unavailable to the translators of the King James Version. It was more than 200 years late in arriving on the scene. More than 300 other unsealed manuscripts of the New Testament are known to exist, and some of these were available to the early translations of the English Bible. The first one we might mention is called Codex Alexandrinus. This one dates from about AD 450, a very well-preserved manuscript, and it ranks behind only Sinaiticus and Vaticanus in importance. It contains the entire Septuagint except for several holes in the pages. These are called lunae. Most of the New Testament is present. Most of Matthew, parts of the Gospel of John, and 2 Corinthians are missing. But the vast majority of the New Testament is present in Codex Alexandrinus. It also contains the apocryphal books of 1st and 2nd Clement and the Psalms of Solomon with some lunae, some holes in the text. This manuscript was given to King Charles I of England in 1627, and it now is also on display in the British Library. So the British Library is very rich in ancient New Testament textual sources. Another manuscript that we should mention is called Codex Ephraemi. It dates from the early 5th century. The interesting thing about this manuscript is it is a palimpsest. Palimpsest is a Greek word that means rubbed out. Codex Ephraemi originally contained both the Septuagint and the Greek New Testament. But the texts of the biblical books were erased, rubbed out, and sermons by an early church father named Ephraim the Syrian were written on the leaves in the 12th century. Writing material of this quality was quite expensive, and some scribe at some time decided that the sermons of Ephraim were more valuable use of this parchment than the New Testament documents themselves. And so Ephraim's sermons were written over where the text of the New Testament had been, and that gives the name to the codex, Codex Ephraemi. Now, Constantine Tischendorf, the same scholar who discovered Codex Sinaiticus, was able to work on the Ephraim Codex. He very painstakingly recovered the dim underwriting and made it available for textual study. He almost went blind doing it because it's almost impossible to see in natural light. But under ultraviolet light, it was easy to recognize the undertext. And we realize that Tischendorf did just a fantastic job of recovering and reproducing that. Most of the Old Testament is missing. And the New Testament is missing all of 2 Thessalonians, 2 John, and parts of other books. So you can see why this codex takes a second place behind Alexandrinus and Sinaiticus in value as a witness to the New Testament text. But nevertheless, it is complete enough to be very valuable. This manuscript has been in Paris since 1547, and it is housed in the National Library of France. Codex Beza is another manuscript that dates to the 5th century. This is the oldest known bilingual manuscript of the New Testament. It contains the Greek text on the left-hand page of each opening and the Latin on the right. Codex Beza contains the 4 Gospels, the book of Acts, and it contains, strangely enough, the book of 3 John, verses 11 to 15. Other books have been lost. The manuscript has been housed at Cambridge University since 1581. And another one we'll take a look at briefly is Codex Claromontanus. It's also a bilingual Greek-Latin composition like Codex Beza. In fact, it really appears to be a sister volume to Beza because it contains Paul's epistles and the epistle to the Hebrews with several lunae. This manuscript is housed in the National Library of Paris. Probably Beza and Claromontanus originally were a 2-volume work intended to go together. They became separated. One ended up in Britain, one in Paris. Now, in addition to these major unsealed manuscripts, there are a number of minuscule or cursive manuscripts available to us as well. Now, these vastly outnumber the unseals, but they're of a much later date, and many are obviously the work of amateur or underskilled scribes. Some of them, however, are good copies of earlier good manuscripts, and they at least provide a second-hand witness to an earlier stage of the text of the New Testament. And as we mentioned before, besides Greek manuscripts, there are a number of other witnesses to the Greek text of the New Testament that are available to scholars. We have a number of versions, and reverse translation of these ancient versions from the languages they're written in, like Latin or Syriac or Coptic, reverse translating those into Greek can be of some value in rediscovering the underlying Greek text from which they were copied. There are also patristic citations. The early church fathers quoted the New Testament scriptures extensively in their writings, and these quotations are a valuable window into the New Testament texts that were available to them. Some have even made the argument that there is enough of the New Testament that is quoted in the writings of the church fathers that if we didn't have any original language New Testament documents available to us, we could recreate the New Testament just from quotations in the church fathers. That may be a little bit ambitious of a claim, but it's not that far off the mark. A third source outside the Greek manuscripts themselves are church lectionaries. A lectionary is a book or a listing that contains a collection of scripture readings appointed for worship and reading on a given day or occasion throughout the year. Currently, 2,484 manuscript lectionaries are known to exist. Most of them contain the Gospels, but Acts and the Epistles are significantly represented as well. The value of lectionaries as witnesses to the early Greek text is limited because the vast majority of them date to the 10th century or even later. The very oldest of them dates only from the 6th century. So there is a considerable gap between these quotations and the original manuscript documents. But collectively, they still make up a significant section of the overall catalog of manuscript witnesses to the text of the New Testament. So, how do we evaluate the total body of our manuscript witnesses to the New Testament? Well, as we said at the beginning of this lesson, if the integrity of the Old Testament can be assured by the skill and the care of the scribes, the accuracy of the New Testament text, as it has come down to us, can be confidently assured simply through the massive volume of available manuscript evidence. Being able to take all of this volume of manuscript work and comparing them, contrasting them, skilled textual critics have been able to restore, we are confident, an almost pure text of the New Testament. And to give an idea of just how many of these documents we've got in comparison with other ancient books, if we took a stack of the existing manuscripts from the average classical writer, they measure about 4 feet high. And yet, the New Testament manuscripts, if all of them were gathered together and stacked up, that stack would be more than a mile high. This abundance of evidence more than justifies the opinion of a scholar named Sir Frederick Kenyon, who said that the Christian can take the whole Bible in his hand and say without fear or hesitation that he holds in it the true Word of God, handed down without essential loss from generation to generation through the centuries. Our next unit will be the final one in this series of lessons. We're going to be looking at the process of translation of these ancient documents ultimately into our English Bibles. This is where we will get down to how reliable our English Bible translations are. It's an exciting study. I hope that you'll be able to join us next week. Thank you very much, and God bless.